started here. My name is Mark Delicave. I'm a vice president with Quizzify, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today. The topic is the proposed new EEOC rules. And to get started here, I'm going to introduce our host and quizmeister, Al Lewis. And in addition to being one of the foremost authorities on wellness and population health, as most of you probably know, Al has authored a book about wellness outcomes analysis entitled Why Nobody Believes the Numbers. He's also authored another book that was actually published in 2013 that he wrote with Tom Emmerich. Tom managed benefits at Walmart for more than 12 years. And in that book, they talk about all sorts of innovations in employee healthcare, things like centers of excellence and pharmacy benefit, better pharmacy benefit management, which is now all going mainstream. But in addition to that, Al also has a law degree from Harvard. And Al has been a very studious observer of what the EEOC is doing and has invited a special guest to join us today. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Al, and he'll introduce our guest.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. First of all, everybody can hear me, I assume. Yes, I do have a law degree, but I am not the lead dog today when it comes to law. We have the leading wellness law authority in the country with us right now, Barbara Zabawa. Now, probably most of you have heard of her because most of you are not new to wellness. And in fact, we are assuming during this presentation that you have a basic understanding of the wellness rules and you're just interested in the changes. Barbara is the founder and the president of the Center for Health and Wellness Law. She also wrote the Rules of Workplace Wellness, which I've written a very nice review of. I found it very useful, and I think you have an excuse for a second edition coming up pretty soon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm sorry, first the agenda, Mark. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So Barbara's going to go through the first couple of items on the agenda, which are what's new from the EEOC and which programs are the quote unquote certain programs that in the draft rules that will still get the 30% safe harbor. And then we will go through how to make sure that your program is considered quote unquote voluntary, even with a large incentive, how you can receive indemnification for not violating, or in case somebody says an employee says you violated the rules, and then why this might be a good opportunity to review your program altogether. As Mark mentioned, you can put questions in the Q&A box, or if you really want to make sure that we see them, you can text them to that number below starting now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara. I'm going to take myself off video because I'm on a DSL connection and I never know when it's going to disappear. Barbara, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Al and Mark, for arranging this important webinar today. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for the very nice introduction as well. So I'm going to talk about what happened basically on the June 11th meeting with the EEOC. At that meeting were the commissioners. There's 3 commissioners, and they heard basically a description, a verbal description from the lead attorney who wrote these draft rules that we'll be talking about, attorney Joyce Walker-Jones. And then they made their comments and voted 2-1 to move those draft rules forward to the Office of Management and Budget, who currently has them and presumably is reviewing them. And then once it completes its review, we'll send it back, and eventually those rules will be made public so that we can actually read the language, because right now what we're talking about today is not based on any sort of analysis of written language. We're only talking about it from the transcript, essentially, from the hearing that occurred on June 11th. So please keep that in mind, that usually as lawyers we like to analyze things based on the written word, and we don't have any written words other than in the transcript. So that's what occurred on June 11th, and the the commissioner who voted against moving these rules as drafted forward was Commissioner Burrows, who was appointed by President Obama and reappointed just recently to the EEOC Commission. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do these draft rules, as we understand it, say? Well, if you recall, previously with the rules that were vacated because of the AARP lawsuit, the EEOC had said any wellness program that collects employee health information, usually through a typical health risk assessment or biometric screening, could incentivize the participation in those medical exams and disability related inquiries as long as the reward wasn't more than 30% of the total cost of self-only coverage. And the AARP sued the EEOC and won. And as a result, as of January 1st, 2019, the language regarding the 30% maximum incentive limit was deleted from the rules. And since then, we've been waiting and waiting for an update, revision. And that's what this June 11th hearing was about, to talk about what the EEOC has decided to do with regard to the revision. And one of the primary takeaways from that hearing, according to the transcript, is that for wellness programs that are collecting health information through a typical health risk assessment or biometric screen that are not an outcomes-based program, part of a group health plan wellness program, that the maximum incentive that you can use to encourage people to participate in your HRA or biometric screen is a de minimis incentive. And there was no definition given at the hearing. And we don't know if they will define it in the rules, but we can at least look to the IRS, who has provided some context of what it means when it says de minimis, as far as what is exempt from including in your income. If you earn a de minimis reward as part of a wellness program, though that reward would not be subject to income tax, and that includes things like t-shirts and water bottles and other trinkets that you might pick up at a booth at a conference, for example. So not worth very much money. And that was one huge takeaway, was that no longer will it be 30% that you can use to incentivize individuals to participate in health information collection. It will only be de minimis incentives, unless, yes, I'm sorry, Al.
Oh, I was going to say that and I'd love your opinion on this. I drew from Judge Bates' decision that set this whole thing up in, I think it was 2018, that it wouldn't necessarily be the IRS definition, that it might be a taxable item, but it might be like a gift card of $50 or $100 or something like that. Yeah.
Well, we don't know what the EEOC is going to say as far as its definition, but I look to the IRS as one resource without any other further explanation from the EEOC. But yeah, it could be something different. They're free to define it separately from the IRS. Certainly they could, but if they were to reference the IRS, and just rely on the IRS's definition, essentially, that would be things like t-shirts and water bottles and granola bars and things like that. So that remains to be seen once we actually see the language. So I was about to say, unless, so de minimis incentives are what you're limited to, at least according to the draft rules, if your wellness program is collecting health information from employees, unless you are a group health plan wellness program. That means your wellness program is part of the employer's group health plan offering, and therefore only the wellness program is only available to employees who are enrolled in that group health plan, and that wellness program is an outcomes-based wellness program, meaning your reward is tied to meeting certain metrics, like certain BMI or certain glucose level or certain cholesterol level, things you might measure in a biometric screen, for example. And if that's the type of wellness program you have as an employer, a group health plan wellness program that is outcomes-based, then the EEOC said at the hearing that you could incentivize employees to up to 30% of the total costs, up to 30% of the total cost of coverage. And that what they were trying to do is more closely align that incentive with the incentives that are available under the HIPAA and Affordable Care Act wellness incentive rules, which, if you recall, only apply to group health plan wellness programs and allow up to 30% of the total cost of coverage as the reward. And it's expected, of course, that those outcomes-based wellness programs would also comply with the HIPAA Affordable Care Act rules, which really wasn't discussed much at the hearing, but it's important to remember that one of those rules that you have to comply with if you're going to incentivize things like an outcomes-based program is that you offer a reasonable alternative standard. And yes, Al. Oh, I can't hear you.
We have actually a bunch of questions, and one is that this does apply to activity. An activity-based program can be an outcome-based program.
They can. The law treats them separately, defines them separately under the Affordable Care Act rules, defines activity-based as things that you do, not necessarily you have to meet a certain measurement, but you have to do like walking challenges or diet programs that invoke your health status in order to do them. And those also have to follow what we call the 5-factor test. But there are some subtle differences between the activity-based and the outcomes-based in the Affordable Care Act rules. So they are treated differently under the law, even though they may overlap.
Okay, we're getting deluged with questions. One of the questions that's come up several times is, yes, you will have access to the slides. Yes, you will have access to the recording. So that takes care of about half the questions.
Okay, great.
Another one, which is always puzzled me. I mean, I give people sort of a meta answer here is, what about a program that requires employees to get a physical but does not collect specific health information other than the proof of the physical? Is that outcomes-based or participatory?
No, that would be participatory under the HIPAA Affordable Care Act rules. That is just getting the exam. That's just like, with the participatory HRA biometrics that are given at the work site, not going to see your doctor, but having someone come on site and have you fill out the HRA and take your biometric exam at the work site. Those are participatory if the reward is tied to just your participation in that activity, not what your results are. That would be outcomes based. And those participatory programs would be subject to the de minimis rules that I just discussed, the de minimis incentive under the ADA, according to the transcript. So why did the EEOC, I've started to talk about why the EEOC decided to carve out an exception for group health plan wellness programs and allow them that are outcomes based to have a 30% incentive limit as opposed to the de minimis, which would apply to everything else. And the reason they gave was the safe harbor of the ADA wellness rules. So if you could turn to the next slide. The insurance safe harbor, this is a very interesting development to me. The insurance safe harbor is basically language that allows health plans, so not the employer, but the plan, to use data that it collects, maybe through a biometric screen and HRA, I guess, to use that information to manage the plan, to administer risks, underwrite risk, classify risk. And that basically exempts health plans from the ADA requirement that wellness programs be voluntary. So if you remember, Al said that we're kind of treating this as not a beginner session. So if you remember with the Americans with Disability Act, the primary requirement for wellness programs to be able to collect employee health data is that it has to be part of a voluntary wellness program. It has to be a voluntary decision by the employee to give over their information. And once you start inserting incentives into that process, the question of whether it's truly voluntary arises, in which that's been the basis for a lot of the lawsuits that have come about, including the one that's still pending, which is the Yale University lawsuit. And anyway, the ADA Insurance Safe Harbor has carved out health plans from having to comply with this voluntary requirement. And in fact, a previous lawsuit, the Flambeau case, which was in the Western District of Wisconsin, where I'm from, the judge in that case said that the safe harbor could apply to wellness programs. And in fact, decided in that case where the employee who sued had to pay 100% of their health insurance premium because he refused to take the HRA and biometric screen. She said that it was permissible under the ADA for the employer to do that because that wellness program was part of their group health plan, and that they were going to be using that data for classifying risks and administering risks. And so the insurance safe harbor was permissible to use in that case. And in the response, this is why I find the safe harbor issue so interesting. In response, when that happened the year before the EEOC came out with its rules that were then overturned by the AARP case, they said in the preamble, well, no wellness programs, regardless of whether they're tied to the group health plan, is allowed to use this insurance safe harbor. The insurance safe harbor does not apply to wellness programs, period. And now with this draft rule and the testimony at the hearing, it sounds like they're backtracking on that position and saying, no, I guess group health plan wellness programs can use the safe harbor, but we're going to limit that incentive amount to 30% to align with the Affordable Care Act incentive limit. So that's what's that was the explanation provided at the hearing for why they carved out group health plan outcomes-based wellness programs to use a higher incentive, higher than de minimis.
So Barbara, we're getting questions faster. I mean, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but there's some very good ones here. And what if we do not incentivize everyone in a oh yes, I can answer that one. I'll answer that one typed. Okay. In other words, does it have to be, say, a United Healthcare wellness program with United Healthcare coverage? It can't be, say, well steps with United Healthcare coverage?
Well, when I say group health plan, it could be an insured health plan, with the United Healthcare as the policy as the insurer, or it could be a self-insured plan. So the employer is, taking on the risk. It could be either one. So you might have United Healthcare be your TPA or third-party administrator, but the employer is the insurer in essence in that case, and governed by ERISA and all that. So yeah, I think, does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure.
If it doesn't, we got to keep going anyway.
Okay, yeah, let's keep going because I got a few more.
We'll have everybody who's
Al.
Okay. Everybody who's asking these questions, we will answer them in writing probably by Monday or so if we don't get to them.
Yeah. Okay. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, with the hearing that happened on June 11th, the EEOC attorney used the safe harbor, the insurance safe harbor, as the rationale behind the 30% allowance, up to 30% incentive amount for the outcomes-based group health plan wellness programs. So that was the other key takeaway from the hearing. So the first one was de minimis, unless you are a outcomes-based group health plan wellness program, in which case you can use incentives up to 30% to incentivize people to participate in your outcomes-based program. Next slide. And I think I kind of already covered this. So the safe harbor position contradicts the EEOC's earlier position that was in writing in the preamble to the 2016 rules. And this was the point that Commissioner Burrows, who voted against moving these rules forward, was most in disagreement with, was this flip of the EEOC's position on the safe harbor, the applicability of the insurance safe harbor to wellness programs. She said that the safe harbor, we've said clearly in the past that the safe harbor does not apply to wellness programs, regardless of group health plan status. And her position, she further elaborated that, the safe harbor was for actuarially sound data, not for, wellness data that's being collected. And so she didn't see how the EEOC could justify switching positions now. And she even went as far as to say, I think that this could be subject to a court challenge, frankly, that these rules are already in jeopardy. And it was in response to that comment by Commissioner Burrows that Commissioner Lipnick, who was one of the two who voted in favor of moving the rules forward, said that at least one other court has found the safe harbor extends to wellness programs. And I believe she was referencing the Flambeau case. She didn't say so in the transcript, but I'm pretty sure she meant the Flambeau case, which is the one I mentioned earlier, where my former boss, Judge Barbara Crabb, said, yeah, you can use this insurance safe harbor to justify falling outside of the voluntary requirement of the ADA wellness rules. Next slide. There was one amendment. So Commissioner Burrows tried to suggest several amendments to the proposed rules that were described at the hearing. And the only one that the commission approved was an amendment that requires employers to ask about privacy and confidentiality standards that third-party wellness vendors are using. So the requirement is only for employers to ask about how a wellness vendor is protecting the information that it collects from employees. It does not require vendors to have certain standards. Only requires employers to ask about those standards. So that was the slide, can you move to the next slide? As something happened. The next one, I don't know what happened, but yeah, so I thought that this was interesting, that HIPAA doesn't always apply to workplace wellness programs, although group health plan wellness programs would be subject to HIPAA privacy and security standards. But, the ADA encompasses wellness programs beyond, group health plan wellness programs. So there's kind of a gap, I think, a regulatory gap as far as the types of privacy and security standards that would apply to workplace wellness programs in all cases. And there was an opportunity, I think, for the EEOC to maybe define some standards, but they didn't. So the only thing that, Commissioner Burrows was able to get as far as an amendment was a requirement that employers just need to ask what the standards are that a vendor has in place. Now, obviously, vendors, will want to be able to respond well and convincingly that they do to protect the privacy and security of health information, and that they should have standards in place, but there aren't uniform standards, is I guess my point. Next slide. Also important to note that this is early in the process. That was mentioned by, I think, either Commissioner Lipnick or Chair Dillon, that you know, these are not final, anywhere near final. They were just voting to move them forward to the OMB, and then at that point, once the OMB is done with them, they'll become public, where the public can provide comments about the rules, and then, you know, the process is the EEOC will take those comments and then issue the final rules, which may not happen until, you know, 2021 maybe. And I will note that on June 30th, the EEOC issued their spring regulatory agenda, which was a little later than usual, and said that July 2020 was the date when they might issue the proposed rules to the public. But I say proceed with caution, because we've seen those dates come and go before with no release of any rules. So just because they say July 2020 doesn't mean it's going to happen in July 2020. We can hope, but now that it's in the OMB's hands, there's no control by the EEOC as far as, you know, when the OMB will get those rules back to them. Next slide. As I mentioned, we probably won't see any final rules, which will be the law. And so until we see final rules, you know, any proposed rules are not technically law. They're just giving us a glimpse as to what the agency's thinking. And it's just important to remember that the safe harbor, the insurance safe harbor, is alive and kicking again. So we'll probably see that in the proposed rules when they're issued to the public, and that it'll apply to outcomes-based group health plan wellness programs. But any participatory programs would be subject to de minimis standards, incentive amounts. So next slide, I think, is, yes, we have our first poll question. So so for you guys listening in, this is a chance for you to take a little quiz. Which of the following is true about the EEOC's rules that were discussed at the June 11th hearing? And you can choose A, B, or C. Or D, sorry. So I don't know how long we usually give everyone.
Oh, we usually, you know, I'm sorry, we usually use this time to ask a question.
Okay.
So one question is, and there are way too many to get to. One question is, how do the rules apply if a wellness program also supplies nutritional supplements as part of their wellness program, which, by the way, I would say is not a good idea, but how do the rules apply?
Well, if we're talking just about the ADA, because nutritional supplements have FDA and all kinds of other rules that apply to them, and state licensing rules too. Don't forget about state licensing rules. Not everybody can supply, you know, nutritional supplements under their license. As far as the ADA, I don't believe they would be applicable. You know, it would be kind of like say a diet program or something. And as long as you aren't collecting health information, you know, from employees, I don't think the ADA is implicated at all.
Mark, do we have an answer? Well, yeah, that was a pretty easy one. Let's do the next one, which I think is slightly, actually, yeah, let's do the next one, which is a little bit harder.
I don't know. I can't see.
Mark? Oh, yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it? Oh.
Which type of wellness program could be excluded from the safe harbor under the proposed rules?
is it A, participatory, B, activity-based, C, outcomes-based, or D, B and C only?
The insurance safe harbor, which one type of wellness program does the insurance safe harbor not apply to? Not apply.
Okay, so Mark, do we have an answer?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a bit of a trick question, wasn't it, Barbara?
Yeah, it was. Yes, it's A, participatory. So those wellness programs, even if they're in a group health plan wellness program, would be subject to the de minimis rules. They couldn't take advantage of this insurance safe harbor 30% maximum. Okay, I think that's it for me. I think it's Al's turn.
Yeah, so we've been getting so many questions that I think we're running a little late, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. So I'm just going to give you the backstory on why this is a win for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, and the wellness industry, because these rules basically have nothing to do with wellness. The whole point is to Mark, the slide. My slide just shifted. Yeah, the whole point is to basically claw back money from the employees, and one vendor, Bravo, even actually advertised that for a while until I caught them, and then they took it off their website. It says, provide you option for immediate employer cost savings. Well, that means you get to fine the employees who don't go along with it. So we're going to ask, first I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory, and then do these programs violate the ACA? And then how can you create your own safe harbor for your own program so you don't have to worry about any of this stuff? So Mark, move it along and I'll do the next. Okay, so let me give you, just step in the Wayback Machine, give you a little bit of context here. The whole thing, this whole 30% clawback thing started with the so-called Safeway Amendment, which was Safeway's program showed the 40% cost savings in wellness, and Safeway's CEO was somebody, one of the senators called him a rock star. He visited with every senator. You can see him here with President Obama. It was basically, that was the argument for doing this program. But then, Mark? But then it actually turned out that Safeway's program was the wrong one to name the wellness clawback after. Now the question is, why was it the wrong one? A, their outcomes were fabricated. B, they didn't adhere to guidelines. C, the program didn't actually exist. Or D, the savings came from fines on non-participants. So meanwhile, we have a way more questions than we can handle. I'm just looking at this Q&A thing. It may be Tuesday before we get back to everybody. And we appreciate everyone's interest here, but Mark, in the interest of time, we should probably just, even if all the votes aren't in, just see what people are saying. Okay, actually, that's a very good guess, because I gave you the Bravo example, which is where the savings come from. Only 3%, which is, in this case, 100 people voted, 3 people said the program didn't exist. And in fact, that is the correct answer. So you can go on to the next slide. Somebody just asked the question. So let me just, it turns out that Safeway's program was a complete mythology. This is, you can actually be able to link through to the Association of Healthcare Journalists on the link above. It did not exist. And this was front page of the Washington Post a month before the vote and it did not change a single vote. The fact that the program didn't exist didn't change a single vote, which shows you how interested people were in actual wellness, as opposed to the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce wanting to get their 30% back. Mark? So a little bit of background on the Safeway CEO, who was the big wellness guru. He got tired of wellness, and then the question is going to be, what did he obsess with next? Was it Roswell? Was it birtherism? Was it Theranos? Or was it the Kennedy assassination? And we'll put that up, and one of the questions that came in was a really good one. They said, what if we don't do it as a penalty, we do it as a cash incentive? And the answer is that penalties and incentives, according to the Judge Bates decision, are kept the same, are treated the same, because typically the quote-unquote incentive is you start with a very skinny program, and then with the quote-unquote incentive, you can go up to a fully configured program. Whereas with a penalty, you start with a fully configured program, and if you lose some money, it's like having a very skinny program. So in the immortal words of the great philosophers, the undisputed truth from 1972, a smile is just a frown turned upside down. Mark, what do we have for this one? Theranos is the correct answer. So let's go to the next slide, and you'll see that, in fact, this guy, by the way, seemed to have very little interest in the grocery business. Safeway stock was going down the whole time. They spent $350 million on Theranos. Next slide. So I was talking about the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which are the major lobbying groups for large and small business. And if anybody had any doubt that they were behind the scenes on this thing, they basically came out in late 2014 when the EEOC was writing its first set of rules, and they threatened to basically pull their support for the entire ACA over wellness. It didn't have to do with, gosh, I wish my employees would lose a little weight. It was, I want the opportunity to keep my 30%. That's what motivated them. And these are some headlines from that era. And they basically, so now you know what the backstory is there. So let's go to the next slide. So the question is, do outcomes-based programs actually violate the ACA? And next slide. Let me talk about the ACA's actual language. This was throwaway language written by a wellness consultant who used to brag about how they let him write the language in the wellness bill, because they didn't really care about the wellness program. They cared about the 30%. So he got to write whatever he wanted. So he said, we don't need accreditation in wellness. We don't need evidence. We don't need proof. We don't need anything except be reasonably designed to improve health or prevent disease. And this, by the way, if you recall back to Barbara's slide where she said a wellness program doesn't need privacy protection, the employer just has to ask if it has privacy protection. These standards are trivial, and yet in the case of the ACA language, the industry has fallen far short of what was supposed to be throwaway language. Mark? So when I discuss these vendors, I'm going to leave out U.S. Preventive Medicine, which actually has achieved a 9% system-wide reduction validated by the Validation Institute. No other vendor has done anything like that. So I don't mean to paint all, and there are also some other very responsible vendors, Limeade or Welltalk or Wellable, Sonic Boom, folks that don't obsess with so-called PRI poke and prod programs. Now, it actually turns out that many of these programs not only don't improve health, but actually can make employees worse. So this article, which is linked, I can't quite see it on my screen, but we put a link in, the impact of workplace health promotion on programs emphasizing individual responsibility, They're basically saying that wellness can make you gain weight and feel worse about yourself. That's the Frontiers in Psychology journal. Slate weighed in with a very, very well-received, tons and tons of comments article on how these programs are a sham. Even the wellness industry itself, they give out these awards every year, and they usually give them to vendors and programs that actually don't do anything. And one case, they managed to get themselves into Stat News because they literally gave their top award to a program. It was Well Steps for the Boise School District, where actually the employees got worse. I mean, they said they got worse. Their health measures were worse. They got the highest wellness award. And then Vitality, I don't know why these people publish these things. They published a study showing that they did wellness on their own employees, and the employees gained weight and their eating habits got worse. Mark? So the thing is, when you think about an outcomes-based program, sort of 70% of it is, we need to get our employees to lose weight. We need to get our employees to lose weight. First of all, it's extremely difficult to lose weight. And second, there are plenty of people who are classified as obese, who are metabolically healthy, and there are plenty of people who are classified as thin, who are not metabolically healthy. So it's a very very, very rough indicator. We're actually eating less than we used to. We're just eating the wrong foods. So all this stuff about, you got to lose weight, is actually doing people more harm than good. Next. Now, so the programs have to, if you recall the language, they have to be reasonably designed to reduce risk or prevent disease. And we already showed they don't reduce risk. Have they prevented disease? So this graph is taken, and it's a totally transparent analysis. You can actually do it yourself. All the inpatient admissions in the United States have been tracked for about 23 years now, and they're tracked by the diagnosis. If in fact, this graph shows what we call the wellness sensitive medical events, what the trade association calls preventively preventable hospitalizations, things like strokes and heart attacks and diabetes, and these are exactly the things that wellness goes after. Now, the first thing to note is that as a percent of all hospitalizations, these things are a shockingly small percentage in the working age population. If anybody wants to take a guess in the chat box about what the #1 reason for hospitalization is in the employee population, Mark, you can interrupt me when somebody makes the guess, and I think you know what the answer is. So going after this 7%, it seems to be an obsession, but it's not. It's only 7%. And if in fact wellness were working, and since this particular set of 13 years was the period in which there was the most penetration of wellness, oh yes, we have an answer. Karen Mastriani, it's pregnancy. Birth events. Of course it's birth events. That's the, this is, if you look at your number of hospitalizations and your cost of total, it's about 30% birth events. Well, in any event, so congratulations to Karen Mastriani. So you would have expected the blue line, and what you get instead is the green line, which is to say that as a percent of total admissions, none of the wellness sensitive medical events as a whole did not decline. They actually rose a little over that period. And here's what the wellness industry had to say about this. We had a public debate, so I'm not quoting anybody out of school. Mark? There was a debate a few years ago, and Seth Surfner from Optum, when I pointed this out, he said, yes, but events would have gone way up if there hadn't been wellness. And by the way, when we say this stuff doesn't work, we have a $3 million reward for anybody who shows that it does work, except if you're using US preventive medicine, where I don't want to lose my money. But otherwise, $3 million reward. But now Seth didn't realize that, of course, I would have thought of that before I made this comment. And then if you look at the next slide, this exact same database that the Agency for Health Research and Quality puts out tracks both the privately insured medical events, which is the ones that you have, the commercial ones, and then it tracks everybody else separately. It tracks Medicare, Medicaid, and uninsured. So if you put Medicare, Medicaid, and uninsured together and make that the red line, and have the green line be what's done by the employers, you can see that in fact you actually would have been slightly better off in terms of your wellness events, your disease, not being in an employer. That over time the two trended about the same, but if anything, the non-employed population did better. Next. Okay, so we've just totally smashed wellness down, but now I'm going to tell you I love wellness. I love wellness if it's voluntary, and I'm going to show you how you can make it voluntary and also create a safe harbor for yourselves on the next slide. Okay, so to create a safe harbor, the key to the Americans with Disability Act is that it has to be a choice. It has to be a voluntary exam. And if you offer a choice of a voluntary screening or Quizzify, you don't have to worry about any of this de minimis stuff. You can maintain your incentives, whether participatory or outcomes, because the program is then voluntary. You don't, the screening part, the medical part, is voluntary. Employees have to do something, but if it has, as Barbara mentioned earlier, if it has nothing to do with medical, it doesn't even trigger the ADA or the ACA. Actually, I'm sorry, it doesn't trigger the ADA. It's an outcomes-based program would trigger the ACA. And this is how you do it. It's absurdly easy. When I say I love wellness, what I mean is I myself go in and voluntarily get screened every 3 years or so because I do like my sugar, I have to say. But otherwise I love to play Quizzify. So what you try to do is you try to take the healthy 2/3 of employees and have them do a employee health literacy program like Quizzify while encouraging the higher risk third to undergo screenings. And it's one page takes care of that, which is the next page. So all you have to do is send employees, and in the old days I would have said put this up in your break room, send employees this that says how to earn your 2021 incentive. You can choose between your traditional screening and weigh-in or play an online health education game. The choice is yours. Now we're trying to get people who really need the screening. I'm going to try starting my video again because my DSL seems to be perfectly stable. Except that now I can't turn it on. We're trying to get people who really need screening into screening. So it says if you haven't been to the doctor, if you're a certain age and been told you have risk factors, if you have family history, if you're very concerned about your weight, if you would like to know your numbers, by all means get screened. And somebody actually on this call is from Montana and said, you know, we like to do screening because Montana is so rural that there are a lot of people who are nowhere near a doctor, and this is the only way they get to learn things. And more power to them. Now, on the other hand, people who don't need screening, well, we got to teach them something. We got to teach them about, you can see this is a whole bunch of different Quizzify topics, everything from everyday health hazards. Is it okay to dip a chip after someone has double dipped to, serious diabetes quizzes, opioids, etc. Next slide. And if you do this or something, I kind of jumped into Quizzify. A lot of folks on this call are not that familiar with Quizzify. And Mark, I'm going to be checking the questions. So why don't I give you the next couple of slides?
Thank you, Al. I'll just spend a moment here to talk about some of our unique value in terms of what goes into Quizzify when you offer it as a wellness option here. The first thing is we've got a great content partner with Harvard Health Publishing. Doctors at Harvard Medical School review our medically oriented content, and that seal is right on a lot of the questions. At this point, our educational health literacy strategy using this robust questioning format has given us, we've developed a database of 1,600 questions. And these questions are updated in real time as guidelines change, and we also really try to stay on the forefront of new things that are very important, like we're the first vendor out there to advocate using SDF, which is a non-invasive, less expensive way to drill and fill cavities. We responded immediately with good information on the nature of COVID-19 in terms of our robust questioning, and we've morphed into this adapt to the workplace and the new normal in terms of lots of content revolving being safe in the new work environment. We are the only vendor to solve the surprise bill problem from emergency rooms, and we do this again through this robust questioning with health literacy education. In the fall of last year, when Zantac was recalled, we were very quick to teach our users not to jump into these proton pump inhibitors, which are commonly known as Nexium, Prilosec, and Prevacid. People go on these medications for years because they work so well, but they have some very serious long-term risks, such as heart attacks, strokes, and kidney disease. And we really made a point of educating people, don't jump out of Zantac into long-term use of these other pills. Back in 2017, we were one of the first vendors to start highlighting the dangers, the addictive natures of prescription opioids. And this is still at a time when prescription opioids were prescribed in bulk for things like wisdom teeth removal, which is a very dangerous remedy. Quizzify is a digitally delivered product, obviously, so we can reach employees wherever they're working, and we'll guarantee our engagement in the sense that Quizzify will guarantee to be the most cost-effective benefit using a tool that the Validation Institute has. And Al's going to elaborate a little bit more on that. And the next slide, we just want to spend a moment to talk about the cost of Quizzify compared to other wellness options. Take, for example, a company with 1,000 to 10,000 employees. Traditional wellness programs will cost $75 to $150 a year per employee. Biometric screening alone can cost $40 to $60. Quizzify is $8 to $12 per employee per year for a group of 1,000 to 10,000. So it really does stand out as a less expensive wellness option. Now I'm going to turn it back to Al here to talk a little bit about some of the engagement aspects of Quizzify.
Okay, Mark, we're getting just ridiculous numbers of questions again. So let me just tell you a couple of things. First of all, when you force people to do wellness, as the figure 15 from one of the best benefits consulting firms, which is Willis Towers Watson put this together, shows, you get a negative net promoter score. People do not like being forced into these programs. Like I say, I love these programs if they're voluntary. Now, on the lower left-hand side, you can see one way of measuring these programs' effectiveness is to take the engagement of the program, which is like how many times did people use the program, how useful did they find it. That gives you an engagement score, and compare it to the cost of the program. And then try to find programs that are the upper and to the left of that, like Quizzify is. And we actually will, we'll guarantee something like that. Now, I've been going a little bit fast because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, and we got Q, and I'm not sure how many A's we're going to get to. Mark, next slide. But what you have to do, whether you do this with Quizzify or not, we said before, you need to create your own safe harbor. So you should be able to find a vendor who is willing to indemnify you, and so you can keep your incentives exactly as they are today, just like Quizzify is willing to indemnify you, by providing an alternative to earning the incentive that is not subject to the ADA de minimis rules, and also that can serve as a reasonable alternative under the Affordable Care Act. You can transfer your risk, not just your liability, but also, frankly, your professional risk, because the people at Yale who put their program together who's getting sued right now, their careers just hit a dead end. So why take this liability and professional risk if you don't have to? We have a clause like this. We have a clause like this in our own, Quizzify, and you can make vendors do something like that, and they should be willing to do it. So, Mark, let's just wrap it up so we can take a couple more questions. Do you feel up to date on the EEO draft regs? And this is, this is kind of tough because you're getting hit out of the blue with this stuff, but we're just telling you that they exist and where they are, and so, take a shot at it. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, let me just see if I got more Q&A going here. If outcomes-based programs are not shown to improve health, or more accurately, are actually usually shown not to improve health, why are they allowed under the safe harbor? And Barbara, I'll let you make a very fast answer to that one. I was starting to write one, but that's more in your.
Sure. Well, because they're the ones that collect health information. So in order to have an outcomes-based program, you have to collect health information. So if you know if the outcome was met, and so the ADA applies to would apply to outcomes-based programs, not activity-based programs. Activity-based programs are things like walking challenges, exercise programs. You don't need to collect health information from employees for them to participate in activity-based programs, but you do for outcomes-based. So the ADA applies only to wellness programs that are collecting, the wellness rules anyway, are only applying to wellness programs that collect employee health information. And so outcomes-based collect employee health information, and under the ACA and HIPAA wellness incentive rules, outcomes-based are subject to a 30% maximum incentive limit. So again, I'm guessing the EEOC is trying to align the ADA with the ACA, and so that's why I picked outcomes-based programs.
Why don't we see how that is, and then I'll get to some of the other questions, how we polled on that. Okay, yes, this was a tough topic. We usually get about 90-10, but we're hitting you with a lot of information all at once. But still, we got you know, a lot of the votes coming in. Meanwhile, we've got and actually, we should probably just Mark, skip the next polling question and just go right to the Q&A because we're running out of time. Here are some of the more things, other things. Do state data privacy laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act impact wellness programs or data collected within them? And Barbara, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, so if you're not, even if you're not subject to HIPAA, which a lot of wellness programs are not, you still have to pay attention to state privacy laws, which can apply to just say healthcare providers, and they have a lot of states have privacy laws that apply much more broadly beyond healthcare. And there's always the right to privacy, you know, typically like a tort kind of claim that can be brought if someone is expecting things to be private and they're not private. You know, they could always sue like in a with, you know, like a tort type basis. So so there's always that as well, and that's a state-based law. There was a related question, some really good questions about HIPAA and whether a wellness program that's doing exams, biometric screens, is a covered entity in their own right and therefore subject to HIPAA privacy and security rules as a covered entity because it's providing healthcare. It's a very insightful question. I've actually recently dived into that question about whether wellness programs that are doing like biometric screens and health risk assessments qualify as a healthcare provider covered entity under the HIPAA privacy and security rules. And let's just say that it's it can be argued either way, but I found a way to say no, they don't qualify as a healthcare provider, so from a legal standpoint. So that's an interesting question that I just wanted to quickly address.
Okay, so we have a bunch more that have come in on my side as well. So the answer, one question is, this is probably for me, like if wellness programs don't work, why are they being incentivized? If outcomes-based wellness programs don't work, why are they being incentivized? That gets back to the initial thing that I said, which is that it's not about the wellness, it's about the 30%. You have to remember who lobbies. The Business Roundtable lobbies, the US Chamber of Commerce lobbies. They basically want their money. And if employees are healthy, they, in theory, cost less. So it's kind of sort of a win-win in theory. It just hasn't worked out that way in practice. And somebody else put in the comments, but if the incentives are de minimis, then nobody will participate in the program. That's true to some degree. I participate in the program without any incentive. But that's the whole point of this, creating your own safe harbor, is that whether you use Quizzify or some other vendor that does not collect clinical information from employees, even you can't do health risk assessments, biometric screens, you can't be asking people questions of any type that is clinical. If you have another vendor like that you offer as an alternative, as we just described with Quizzify, then you can keep your incentives the same as they are now. That's the whole point of this webinar. Well, not the whole point, but the point of the last part of the webinar, which is how can you maintain how can you just check the box and say, we're not going to worry about this next year? Answer is you provide an alternative to a clinical program. We got more questions coming in here. If you collect health information but do not use it as an outcome, what happens? Barbara, I'll leave that to you.
If you collect it, but you're not using it as outcome based, so if you're collecting health information from employees as part of your wellness program, you are subject to the ADA, and you have to meet the voluntary requirement, and the EEOC under these draft rules have defined voluntary, at least in that case, because it's not outcomes based, that your incentive could only be de minimis. However, that will be defined.
Yes, and I think Barbara and I wouldn't say we disagree because Barbara doesn't have an opinion, but my opinion is that they're going to set the de minimis at about 200 or something like that.
Okay.
And that's going to be enough. I mean, I don't know, Barbara. I'm just, when people have asked me in the past after the court case, I've said if I was doing under over, that would be where I'd put the 50-50 odds.
200.
Yeah,
$200.
maybe 100. Yeah. Not much more than that for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we are turning into, people have asked questions about Quizzify's pricing, and we love you for it. But we've already done our 60-second sales pitch here, so we'll write back on those. But basically, it's about $1 a month per employee, less or more depending on size of contract, length of contract, and the size of the firm. So we are officially turned into pumpkins at this point. We did not get to all the questions. We did not get to the chat box questions, but we're people starting to sign off. So before everybody signs off, we should probably say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. And Tuesday at the latest, we'll send you the answers to these questions.
And everyone that attended will get a video of this webinar with the slides and the speakers, as well as a link to the slides for your review. And there will be our contact information in that so you can reach out with other questions. Thank you.
Are we still live or?